All right. Let's go ahead and bring it back together. I wasn't able to get the mic figured out, so I will be mic-less. So if you can't hear me, let me know and I'll yell louder. But hopefully you can make out most of what I'm saying. So what came up in your discussions? Where did we notice the law at work in this 2 Chronicles and Ezra reading? Yeah.
4:19? No, that was the gospel. You said law?
I said law. We'll start with law. You saved that gospel.
Law, lots of places.
Law, lots of places. Yes, there's a lot of places. A lot. What were some examples?
17, they were talking about the Levites took out the ark.
4:17, the Levites taking out the ark. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The building of the temple, all according to what was written in the law of Moses, the man of God. Yep. Mm-hmm. What else did we notice? Yeah.
Laws on 477.
477.
Paragraph. About don't give your daughters in marriage
Yeah.
for their daughters to the foreign people that worship other gods.
Yeah. So 477, kind of middle of the page, where this is part of Ezra's prayer of repentance, we could say, to God, and he is quoting more or less, or paraphrasing from the law of Moses. Do not give your daughters in marriage to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons. Do not seek a treaty of friendship with them at any time, that you may be strong and eat the good things of the land. And the them in that are the peoples of the land that Israel is supposed to draw out. So remember, this is from the law of Moses, this is in the wilderness coming into the land. But Ezra is now returned. He's been sent after the temple has finally been built, after all of this process. And he is very disturbed by the fact that there has been a lot of intermarrying among the people who have returned from Babylon. And they are not observing the law. So there's the law at work there. Yeah.
And then at the end of that page,
Yep.
Ezra says, let's make a covenant before our God to send the women and children.
Yes, yeah. To send the women and children away. Let's make a covenant. This is a legal form here. We'll make a contract, we could say. Yeah. This is the big issue of Ezra. Well, maybe the building of the temple is a big issue. This might be the number 2 big issue of the book of Ezra. Although it just comes in right at the end, and then it's resolved. There's a list of things, and then the book ends, and then we're into Nehemiah. But, yeah. Where else did we notice the law? And then I'll come to you in a second, Cheryl. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Page 473.
473.
The second paragraph at the end. Ezra had devoted himself to the study and observance
Yes,
of
good.
the law of the Lord and the teaching of it.
Yeah, so Ezra had devoted himself to the study and observance of the law of the Lord and to teaching its decrees and laws in Israel. So there's something interesting about Ezra. Ezra is the expert sent in because the exiles don't know what the law says. You notice that? Like, why is there nobody there who can do this? Why do they have to call for this expert from Persia, or Babylon really is where he's coming from, in order to come in? Well, one of the reasons might be that they don't speak Hebrew anymore. There's a language change has happened. They now speak Aramaic. Aramaic is the standard language. Aramaic was so kind of like English is today, where you can go most of the world around and you can find somebody who speaks at least some English, and you can kind of get by it, sort of the default international language if there is one. At this time, Aramaic was that default international language. It had been for quite a while. Shortly after this, after Alexander the Great comes through, Greek will become the standard default international language. And by the time of Jesus, for example, that is the default language, even though in Judea they still speak Aramaic. That's still their home language. Aramaic is very closely related to Hebrew. It's written Hebrew is written in the Aramaic alphabet, so just by looking, it's hard to tell which language you're dealing with unless you know some of the grammars of them. They share a lot of vocabulary. They're very similar, but they're not the same language. And we know that when Jesus is on the cross, for example, and he yells out, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my Lord, or my God, why have you forsaken me? That's Aramaic. You can tell, because if it was Hebrew, he would have said something like Eli, Eli, lama azavtani, which is just close but different, right? That's the Hebrew version of the psalm that he's quoting. He says it in Aramaic. He doesn't say it in the Hebrew that it's written in. And so there's a language issue here. So Ezra is the legal expert, right? He's the expert on the law, on the traditions, on Moses. And the people are having a hard time holding themselves together, we could maybe think of, something like that. And this is what his reading of the law instructs the people to do. So that's kind of what the issue of Ezra, or this second half of Ezra maybe, is going on here. Yeah.
Don't they kind of think Ezra wrote First and Second Chronicles?
So Ezra is often credited as being the writer of First and Second Chronicles. I don't know how widely accepted that is. That's certainly the traditional view. I was reading a little bit. So the way that this presents in its invitation, it talks about First, Second Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah as one kind of continuous work, and they're certainly presented that way. Although there's some reasons to think, I guess, I was reading this last week, I didn't know this. There's some reasons to think that First and Second Chronicles are actually written after Ezra and Nehemiah. So Ezra and Nehemiah were written first, and then First and Second Chronicles is written a little bit later. They don't, you can't be too specific with these sorts of things. A little bit later, and as a history leading into it, right? So sort of the prequel. You can think of it that way. That's written after the fact to explain how do we get to this part, where Ezra opens. So Second Chronicles ends with almost identical words that Ezra opens with. You maybe noticed on page, what would it be? Page 412, where there's a repetition. Or no, it's not 412. It's, what page would it be? It wouldn't be 412, it'd be 463. Sorry. Looking at the beginning of the wrong book. So where the transition from Second Chronicles to Ezra is, the first time I read this, I was like, oh, there's a misprint, right? Did anybody else think of that? In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, and then 2 paragraphs down, you read exactly the same words. It's because that first part is the end of Second Chronicles, and then the second in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, is the beginning of the book of Ezra. So they're made to dovetail into each other. Yeah. But yeah, Ezra's a priest. Notice when he's introduced, they go all the way back to Aaron, right? So here's his whole lineage. He's purebred and he has the papers to prove it, right? All the way back to Aaron. Yeah. Here's a question: why would this be so important to have somebody like Ezra come in, and why would the people weep? For example, why would Ezra weep when he says, "Oh, you've married these other people"? Yeah.
The law itself had changed every time there was a new king.
Sure.
And at that point where one king tried to reenact or reinsert the law of Moses, and then people failed.
And the next king would completely turn away from it.
And I think Ezra was, other than a king, he would come in and maybe be able to clarify, I guess, the law to the people and the king. And
in some ways, what we're seeing here in the transition from coming back from the exile is they can't have kings, really. They can have governors, right? They're under the Persian Empire. They can't have a king. They're not going to be their own independent kingdom for, there's about a 1 century period, a few centuries down the road, where they are able to be self-governing, and then the Romans come in, and that's the situation that holds for a long time, through the time of Jesus. So they can't have a king, and so the priest now, the head priest, the chief priest, becomes sort of a de facto political, cultural leader, really. Like they're sort of the most important person in some ways. And then, Zerubbabel and Joshua are mentioned side by side before Ezra comes, right? That you've got this sort of governor appointed by the Persians, and you've got this religious leader on the other side, right? That you've got both of these together. And so Ezra comes in, and he's the priest, but he's also the expert. He's the guy that knows, that you can read the law of Moses, that has studied it, that knows what is supposed to be here, what's happening, all of that. And so there's this kind of transition in the importance of the king to the importance of the priest, we could say. Maybe civil leadership to religious leadership as a people, anyway.
This was given to Ezra from God. The hand of God was on him, and
Yeah. So Ezra feels very much this call to go and do this with this people. And Ezra is portrayed completely positively in the book of Ezra. I can't think of any, well, and even and in Nehemiah, like that, when Ezra is portrayed completely positively by the text, as far as I can remember. Yeah. We might have different opinions, but as far as the text is considered. Yeah.
Well, isn't Iran Persia?
Yeah, Iran is Persia. Yeah.
So this is still going on.
In what way?
Yeah.
Say a little bit more about that. What do you mean it's still going on?
Well, I mean, they're still fighting with.
Oh, I see what you mean.
You know.
Yeah, there's still conflict.
Yes.
It's never ended.
Yeah, although I think the current Iranian government is harder to trace back to Persia. I'd say the pre-1970, whatever it was, revolution. The current Islamic government of Iran is very different from what existed pre-1970, whatever that revolution was, 72. And I'd say you'd have a lot more connection with, that's much more connected to Persia than the current, 50-year regime of Iran is today. But because we think of Iran as I do because I'm young. Maybe you, I don't know how you all think of Iran. We think of Iran as a Muslim country, right? As it's an Islamic country. So there is no Islam yet. There won't be an Islam for 1,000 years after this. So some of those religious things really are not a part of this at all. What we have today is very different from what was then. But to the extent that Iran is sort of the inheritor of this Persian tradition, which was in some ways kind of wiped out by the Islamic Revolution, or was attempted to be wiped out. We'll see what the future holds for that. But is that connection's very much still there. Yeah. And the Persians, of course, lose to Alexander the Great. That's the end of the Persian Empire. The Greeks come in, and then Alexander the Great Alexander the Great, he dies at 30 something. I can't remember how old he was, but young man, and his empire splits into three after him. And so that's the one part after a century or so of that, because Israel's the border between two of those splits. They're able to eke out a little bit of independence for a while because these two are always fighting over them, and then they're kind of weak, and so Israel has a little bit, and then the Romans come in, and everything's Roman again, or everything's Roman for quite a long time. But thinking of empires and the way that the law kind of functions, when we get to Daniel makes a big deal of this sort of succession of empires that comes in. We'll see some of that in there too.
And they're fighting over the land. It's the same land.
Yeah, they're fighting over. What are they fighting over? They're fighting over power. It's a little different from land. So the Israelites are certainly committed to the land. I don't think Persia cares about the land. I think they care about taxes. Right? Persia cares about the power and the influence. Did you notice in those letters? So here's a way the law shows up. There's some legal arguments, right? There's some different legal opinions making petitions to the king about the one group says, oh, you can't let them rebuild Jerusalem, they'll rebel. And the king goes back in the records and he says, oh, look, Jerusalem's rebelled several times. It's all there. And then another makes their appeal, and they say, well, actually, Cyrus said that we should build the temple and actually commanded everybody else to help us. And he goes back in the records and he says, oh, yes, that's what it is. So there's this back and forth here. And where was I going with that? Sorry, I got distracted. It's legal arguments back and forth. Oh, but the argument that they make, so the people who want to stop the building of the temple, when they write, they say, if you let the Jerusalem be rebuilt, you won't get any more taxes. That's what they said. You won't be able to collect tribute anymore. You won't be able to do any of this. Your power in the region, which is understood as what resources you can take from the region, will be limited. And so that's what's convincing to the king at first, right? He's like, oh yeah, that's bad. We don't want that. He doesn't care about the land. The Persians don't care about the land. They care about the income that they can get from the people by having power there. Yeah. Yeah. Did you have, I thought I saw a hand over here.
Same thing today.
Yeah, no, it's not much different. Yeah. Now the land has important resources under it more than on top of it, which has changed our, the existence of borders in the way that we have them today. I've read arguments that a lot of it has to do with the fact that oil is restricted to land in a way that previous resources weren't. So it made a very big difference, how many feet over it is, because where can you drill, where can't you? Whereas before, you could sort of have loose borders because it was fields and it was your power was over people primarily. Yeah. It's a different thing. But yeah, it's all, those same things that motivate foreign policy today are there in those times too. Yeah, and they're working within them. I kind of want to get back to the other question, though. So Ezra weeping over the people, this forced dissolution of marriages, which at least as it's portrayed in Ezra is almost unanimous. Almost everybody agrees, yes, this is the right thing to do. There's 2 dissenters listed, but everybody else is like, yes, absolutely, we should do this, which seems like hard to believe. Can you, just to try and bridge the cultural and time difference between us now and them then, can you make any sense of that? Can anybody think of how that would be important or positive to those people? Yeah.
I was thinking, because he's so sad that they didn't follow God's laws and they failed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So something about distance from God and God's law, disobedience of God's law, being in the right with God. That could be part of it. That is part of it, I think. What else? Any other things you can think of?
Well, intermixing. I mean,
Yeah.
We've struggled with that in our country. Interracial marriage.
Sure.
Or those kinds of things. So, or interreligious marriages.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to dilute whatever your beliefs are. I mean,
So something about dilution of beliefs, maybe.
Yeah.
I think, and there's something to that. The reason given in Deuteronomy, for example, is you will start to worship their gods.
And
Right.
Solomon or any of those guys.
And Solomon is interesting, not in Chronicles. You notice that? No. Solomon no mention of Solomon's idolatry in Chronicles, but in 2 Kings, or 1 Kings rather, very clear, right? Like that's Solomon's problem. He has all of these, 1,000 wives more or less, and he builds temples for all their gods, and he goes and he worships at them. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand why, to me, the men should have been punished, not the women and children.
Yeah. I wonder if they understand this to be punishment. I hear what you're saying. Yeah, it sounds like why are the women and the children being punished? The punishment being sent away. I'm not saying this isn't a hardship for them. Clearly it is, right? What's happening to these women and children? How are they fending for themselves? Where are they going? There's no... the book of Ezra doesn't seem to care about that. It doesn't address that at all.
Would there ever be...
But I'm also not sure it's understood to be punishment. It's not like they are wrong for this. It's more like this is how we rectify the bad situation we're in. Yeah.
Would there ever be women who chose a man on the outside?
I don't know that women would ever be able to choose a man on the outside. They might have a man chosen for them on the outside. Yeah, it's interesting. It doesn't seem to follow that. I will say, and I think I mentioned this when we would go through the Law of Moses. The Law of Moses is written for men, right? Very specifically, it's for men. Every male among you shall appear before me at these 3 festivals, for example. It's just not, the women aren't mentioned, really. I mean, they're mentioned, but they're not central. The men are understood to be the address of the Law of Moses. Now, you husbands out there, you be careful about what you say. I can quote Galatians 3 that in Christ there is no longer male or female, as Paul will say, making this point actually about observance of the law. But, that culture, the men are the center of everything. So I feel like this has flipped. I'm not as familiar with this. Maybe some of you are, but like in modern Judaism, it's the mother who makes you Jewish, right? Like, so if your mother is Jewish, you're Jewish. It's not so much if your father is Jewish. As far as sort of like ethnically Jewish, not necessarily your religious practice. I don't know that doesn't seem to be the case, right, in the Old Testament. And so I don't know how and when that shifted or what that's like. But that does seem, it's the men. The sign of the covenant, which is circumcision, applies obviously only to men, right? Only men can be circumcised or to be circumcised. And so the women, whoever they are attached to, whatever, their father, their male relative, their husband, whoever that is, that's sort of what determines their inness or outness related to this. Now, people can make the argument that the Law of Moses, this is how God always intends it to be, and this is how it ought to be, and maybe you've come across people that are making that sort of argument today. I think the pretty clear witness of, especially the New Testament, but even within the Old Testament, is that this is not the way things are. This isn't an ought, this is just a description of what is. This is the culture that it's coming into, and this is the way God is working within that culture, right? Yeah.
Does that go back to the original sin, Adam and Eve?
Oh, interesting. Well, okay, so part of the curse of Adam and Eve, of the original, after the sin, the curse of the woman is that she will have pain in childbirth, that her desire will be for her husband, and that he will lord over her. And so there is this, in Genesis 3, sort of, why is the world so uneven? Well, it's because of sin. You know, why do men dominate women? Because of sin. That's why men dominate women. It's the curse because of sin. We could say it's the fruit or the wages of sin, to use Paul's term later on in Romans. So that also means, like, this is part of how the world is. That doesn't mean that's part of how God wants the world to be. Is that how heaven will be? It's another way of thinking about this. How will the new creation be? Well, the new creation will be free of curse, so that won't be part of the new creation, this domination of women. Yeah.
I had an older Christian man that worked here in the valley, and we were fairly newly wedded, and we went to the Covenant Church. And anyway, we were talking some about, marriage, and he said, God took the rib of man close to your heart. So when you marry a woman,
Mm-hmm.
you keep that in your life. It's a sacred connection.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of, Vic was saying, is thinking of in the creation of woman story in Genesis 2. It's the rib, or it's the side. The Hebrew word's a little hard to translate, but something close to the heart. And the idea is that there's a, this is given to you at the time of marriage, right? That there's a, keeping this, there's a maybe a completion to you, right? Of being close, that this is how it ought to be. I'm reminded of I think it's in Ephesians, for example. There's this double command to husbands and wives, which is unusual, actually, that there'd be a double command to husbands and wives. Double command to husbands and wives, that wives are to respect their husbands, that husbands are to love their wives, right? Which is actually the harder call. They're called to, so especially in the New Testament, what does love lead to? Well, it leads to laying down your life for the other, right? Yeah. This is love, that one should lay down one's life for one's friends, those whom one loves. So the husband is actually given a harder command in the New Testament than the wife is, to respect their husband, or submit is somehow way that's translated. Really, what the word means is sort of be. How would you say it? It's hupotasso is the word. It's sort of to live your life with this relationship central is maybe a way of thinking about it. It's not sort of a simple like obedience submission that word kind of carries in English. It's a much deeper relationship than that. But that's a counter to the way the culture is. Husbands, in first century Jewish culture. So one of the debates was, is it lawful or not for a husband to send his wife away because she was made a bad dinner? Is that a reasonable grounds for divorce? Now, notice what's in that question. There's no question about whether divorce is allowed or not. And there's no question that the woman has any say in divorce. The question is, when is the man justified to send divorce? So this question gets brought in a little different form to Jesus, right? And Jesus answers by essentially saying, what God, well, actually part of this quote we use in weddings, what God has joined together, let no one separate. So Jesus comes with this much different answer than what is the common debate at the time. I've heard arguments that he's actually siding with one of the sides of the debate. I'm not saying his position was necessarily unique there, but it's different than what the culture is. The culture does not assume that men really have much responsibility at all for their wives, actually. They are the ones who get to decide what that responsibility is or not. New Testament, and we see this in Ezra, there's not really any qualms that the men send the women and the children away. There's no question about that. It's like, well, the men get to do that, and they're not really thinking about it. But that's going to shift, I guess, is what I'm pointing to. Just notice how there's a critique of the culture there. Just because something is this way in Scripture doesn't mean it ought to be that way in Scripture, or it ought to be that way in the world today. Yeah.
When I think of the rib, I think of the X and Y chromosomes.
Sure, yeah.
And the women have the X chromosome, the double X chromosome. It has more than the man does.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
So it's,
Yeah. Chromosomally is interesting. The Y chromosome is sort of it's just barely hanging on in some ways. There's very little genetic material in the Y chromosome. Actually, there's a lot in the X. That's why certain Fragile X syndrome is very severe in boys, but not in girls, because girls have an extra X to make up for it. Boys don't.
Because the baby lives in the mother.
Yeah, and so why is that? I don't know, but it's interesting that there's, it'd be if Paul, it'd be interesting to hear what Paul or any of the scriptural writers, if they knew the sort of chromosomal science that we know today, how would they interpret that? That'd be interesting to hear, actually.
well, God knew the chromosomal
Yeah.
science because he did it.
Sure.
So
Yeah. I guess I'm just trying to think of how do you connect those, as you're sort of starting to do with the idea of the rib and the taken out of, and the difference, the similarity at differences that complement but are more than they are separately. That there's a togetherness that's more than they are separately. I don't know.
they can't procreate without both of them.
Yes, right. That both of these are necessary for reproduction. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. Where do we notice the gospel in this text? I know Cheryl had one because she tried to jump to it. Was it 4:17? I think you yelled at. Do I remember the number right? 4:18? We're on 4:18. Oh yeah, right at the top there, maybe.
I got it on 4:17.
Oh, 4:17. What do you have in 4:17?
No, 4:19.
4:19. Oh, we're just jumping all over the place.
It says, "You shall never fail to have a successor to sit before me on the throne of Israel."
Good.
Further on in that paragraph.
Yeah, this is the promise to David, or this is the promise to David being recalled by Solomon, right? Where we are. Yeah. You will never fail to have a successor on your throne. Yeah. This is as we've talked about, this is the root of the expectation of Messiah that develops, that continues to develop over the next centuries after this. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Here's a distinction. So Ezra at the end is very concerned about we could say the purity of the people, that the people are cohesive as a unit. I'd say it's less the purity and it's more the cohesiveness, that we can tell who is us, who we are, that we're defined. Did you notice in Solomon's prayer how much attention there is to those who are not part of Israel? So Solomon is dedicating the temple. He's giving this prayer of dedication to the temple. And there's this series of paragraphs that all have this basically the same plea that, when this happens and we turn and speak to you at the temple, hear us, right? So may you hear the prayer your servant prays toward this place. And it keeps going on. So when the heavens are shut up and there's no rain, when famine or plague comes, when anyone wrongs their neighbor and comes and asks for forgiveness. And then as the foreigner who does not belong to your people Israel, but has come from a distant land because of your great name, when they pray towards this temple, then hear from heaven, your dwelling place. Do whatever the foreigner asks of you. That there's this sort of broader picture that Solomon, or in Chronicles, that Chronicles has in this prayer of Solomon, than we see in Ezra. That there's some tension here. One of the things I was reading was sort of explaining this tension as the difference between Ezra being the people who are barely holding together, and so trying to create a unity among these people, this conformity, and so that the marriage prohibition, we could call it a mixed marriage prohibition, is so strong and important there. Whereas if Chronicles is written a little later after they're established, they have the temple, maybe if it's post-Nehemiah, they have the walls built, they have a city. Now those things don't have to be enforced quite the same. The closest I can think of, and I maybe mentioned this in my sermon last week, I think I did, but the closest parallel I can think of in modern times has to do with the rights of children being adopted out of tribes in our country. So there's a lot of legal protections, and those legal protections sometimes really get in the way. I spoke to somebody actually just this last week for whom, I only heard his side, but for whom this fact that there was a tribal involvement, that he was not a tribal member, but his partner was, the mother of the child was, and that, in his view, really acted in bad interests of that child, because the child was strongly preferred to be in a situation that was very unhealthy rather than with him. I hear this from, white families that are wanting to adopt children and being denied it, and it's hard to see, well, why? Well, from the tribe's perspective, the tribes are trying to hold on to an identity. They're trying to keep themselves after a lot of history, recent history, still somewhat ongoing history, of very intentional attempts to take that identity of a people away from them, right? What is it? The boarding school quote, something like saving the Indian by civilizing the Indian. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, but like taking their culture out of them, taking their identity as a people. And I think probably the most charitable way to read Ezra's concern there is in a similar situation, that they are a people, they call themselves slaves, right? I don't know if you noticed that in Ezra's prayer near the end, he says, we're just slaves, God, and yet you've left us a remnant and let us come back here. And he means slaves were subjects of this empire, the Persian Empire. They're not their own unique people. The Babylonians, that was their policy. They tried to de-identify people, like to try and take this sort of national identities away from people. And scatter them and make them all Babylonian. And when the Persians come in, now they're here trying to hold on to this. And they've so lost their identity that they know this place, but they're disconnected from the law of Moses. They have to bring in Ezra, this guy who's, actually studied this to learn what should be their heartfelt home traditions. They should have learned all this growing up. They should be deeply familiar with these things, but they've been taken away from them. So I think there's something of that going on here, that there's an attempt to keep us as a people. Now, does that cause a lot of pain and hardship for those women and children sent away? I'm sure it does. Ezra doesn't talk about it, but I'm sure that's a difficult thing. But I think that's the way to understand what's happening here. We tend to project race. In fact, even one of the translations was race in here, which I think is a mistranslation. But we tend to project modern ideas of race, but race as a category has only existed for a couple hundred years, 300 years maybe. The idea of ethnicity, of lineage, of nation, those things have existed, but this sort of idea that there are, that skin color, for example, in particular, can be a representative of race, and that there's something dirty in this race and clean. A lot of that owes its background to the development of like evolutionary science, actually. I mean, that's sort of Darwinian. And so a lot of the 20th century memories that we have of eugenics, of, the Nazis. So the Nazis understood Jews to be a race. That was new. Christian anti-Semitism before that was very bad to Jews. I have nothing good to say about it, but it wasn't racial in character. It was different. It was religious in character, which is maybe a fine distinction, but it's a distinction. It makes a difference. It's the difference between expelling somebody who ever had a Jewish ancestor to saying, well, we're not allowing Jewish worship. Now, neither of those are good things, but one leads to death camps and the other one doesn't, right? There's a difference between them in that sense. So don't put racial categories on what's happening in Ezra. You can put ethnic categories maybe, or cultural categories, or people, national categories, even religious categories, but it's not racial in the sort of genetic sense that we think of race today. So that's just something to be aware of. That's part of our that's a modern thing. That's a modern worldview that we have. Yeah.
I'm not sure on the definition of this, if it's law and gospel together, but
yeah.
I think 435.
435.
And the third one, where it starts with Jehoshaphat.
Yep.
And it goes down, and consider carefully what you do, because you are not judging for mere mortals, but for the Lord who is with you whenever you give the verdict. And then it goes on and says, now let the fear of the Lord be with you. And I thought this, judge carefully with the Lord our God, that is, my eyes are watering.
Yeah.
I can't read.
So with the Lord our God, there is no injustice or partiality or bribery.
I thought maybe there was a law and gospel together.
Yeah, there's something interesting there. Certainly it's largely legal, right? And even this charge to Jehoshaphat is like, basically you are accountable to God for what you do, as part of that. That's certainly the word of the law, right? That's the word of the law, saying, do this. You're not judging just for mere mortals, but for God. But then there's who is with you whenever you give a verdict. So there's some promise of gospel there. Yeah, I can see how this does feel like some of both of it. With the Lord our God, there is no injustice or partiality or bribery. I think that can function both. I was going to say that maybe can function both as law and gospel. I'm going to say, actually, no, that does function as law, but it functions as the law negatively if you're the sort of person who depends on bribery. You know, so if you're one of the people who you get by because you have the resources to grease the palms of anyone that you encounter, well, then that's not going to work with God. That's bad. That's a bad word for you, right? Or that's a hard word for you. Now, if you're one of the poor who does not rely on bribery, would love to if you could, but you can't, to hear that God has no injustice and is not swayed by bribes, well, that's really good news. Now, it's still the law, but it's justice is what we call justice. It's the law at work, the law doing what it's supposed to do, the law rightly applied rather than the law being twisted by bribery. So, yeah, you can maybe get some gospel out of that, but it's maybe not quite the gospel in its form there. You'd have to now apply it as gospel, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So after all that, and he does what he's commanded on page 437.
437.
The fear of God came on all the surrounding kingdoms when they heard how the Lord had fought against the enemies of Israel and the kingdom of
Jehoshaphat.
Jehoshaphat.
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, that's at peace. For his God had given him rest on every side.
Yeah.
Would that be the gospel then?
Yeah, or maybe it's the fulfillment of the promise that had been given to him. So certainly, yeah, that promise would certainly be gospel. For the kingdoms around, they're experiencing God as something to be afraid of, right? But it's bringing peace to their enemy, perhaps. Maybe they have some peace too, because they're not challenging Israel. I don't know what that's like. But the kingdom of Jehoshaphat was at peace. What surprised us in these texts? Yeah.
Mine was only less than 50,000 came back.
Only less than 50,000 returned.
How many were there that left?
We don't have good numbers for it.
Okay.
I have seen more than that is basically what I've seen. I've seen some low estimates too, actually, that maybe a smaller number actually go that way, but it's sort of fewer people I don't think that was counting people that also went to Egypt and fled to other places during this time. But basically as many as I think around, from some of the records that we have, something like 30 to 40% of the population was taken, had left the land at that time. Which is actually, if I remember right, is less than happened when the Romans did something similar about 100 years after Jesus. That was upward. That was a majority were either killed or driven out.
And just think about how many Moses was leading.
Yeah. So the numbers of the exile, or not exile, the exodus from Egypt compared to the exiles returning is pretty stark. Yeah. Brian first.
I'm still stuck on last week a little bit here, the census
Sure.
of David.
Yeah.
I was thinking as we were talking about it last week, I had to go look it up, but in 2 Samuel, well, I guess first what we read in Chronicles says,
Satan incited David to,
Satan incited David.
Yeah.
In 2 Samuel, it says, again, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he incited David.
Yeah. So in Samuel, God incites David to do the census because God is angry. In Chronicles, Satan does it, which is interesting.
So why in that later writing did it get changed, I guess?
Yeah. Well, it also raises the connection we talked about in Job, where is Satan God's enemy in Job? It's not. I don't think the book of Job presents Satan as God's enemy. Satan is clearly Job's enemy, right? I mean, that's very clear. But Satan doesn't seem to be God's enemy. I'm sure he's God's friend either, but he's almost portrayed as, the one who goes out and tests for the sake of God. It's almost like he's I think I've used this DA, prosecuting attorney, metaphor, which Satan is. I also read something recently that said that Satan, the word there, Satan, might be sort of a mistranslation. It is the word Satan in Hebrew, Satan, but maybe it's not supposed to be a name. Maybe it's just supposed to be the word adversary, an adversary inside of David. And they were they were interpreting that as maybe an enemy kingdom threatened the kingdom, and so it drove David into build the army mode of census, and that was what the wrong was. I don't know. That was an argument I read. Not sure it was a good one, but that was what something I read.
Were those two separate incidences, or were they?
No, they're the same. They're retellings of the same incident. Yeah. The incident that ends with David purchasing the threshing floor of Arona, which is where the temple ends up being built. So it's the same incident. Yeah. Laura, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was interested that they named all those gates.
Oh, yeah.
The Valley Gate and
Yeah.
Sheep Gate.
Yeah.
Gate.
So the names of the gates, did it raise any connections for you or make you wonder about anything?
Well, in the Revelation, some gates are going to be closed and some are open.
Yeah, so in the Revelation description of the Jerusalem, I think they're all opened. I don't know if any of them are closed. Maybe I could be wrong on that. I have to think about that. But they all have names too. That they're if I remember right, they have the names of the tribes and the apostles. If I remember right, I have to go and look in Revelation now. We'll get there. We'll see. Vic, I saw your hand up too.
Page 460 and 61, down towards the bottom there. Throughout all this reading, we see a lot of writing about sacrifices.
Yes.
All this cattle and sheep and goats and the wine and grain offerings.
Yep.
And then here at the very top of 461, they served it quickly to all the people.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Now, I've never read that in any of the other writings.
Yep.
That they actually fed the people.
So almost all the sacrifices are eaten. There's an exception called the whole burnt offering, and that's everything's burnt. But that's the exception. That's like the highest offering, and it doesn't happen that often. It happens at Yom Kippur. It happens a few other times, I think. In general, the sacrifices are eaten. I think I maybe have shared this before, but the rabbi who led the tour of Israel that I did a few years back, he said he referred to the sacrifice as the Great Jewish Cookout. That's what they were doing, and there's something to that. So, and in Leviticus, if you, in reading in Leviticus, and there's this sense of you almost it's a little unclear, but depending on how you interpret it, maybe you don't eat meat at all unless it's sacrificed. Like that's when you eat meat, and there's maybe a few exceptions. Like there's some exceptions for when meat's found and that sort of thing, but or when an animal has recently died, that sort of thing. But in general, like the normal process is anytime you slaughter an animal to eat it, you do it in the presence of God. And then you eat it together communally, and some of it goes to the priest as sort of their payment for doing it, right? Which is actually harkens back to, frontier churches where, pastors are getting paid with chickens and so on, right? That's just the thing that happened, but that was the way it is. But yeah, so anytime you read of these sacrifices, assume that people are eating them, unless it's specified it's a whole burnt offering. Those are different.
They didn't have a way of keeping it like we do nowadays.
No, I didn't have freezers to throw it in. Yeah.
Fresh
Yeah, exactly.
all the time.
Yeah, you kept it fresh by keeping it alive until you were ready for it, for the most part. I mean, you could salt pack and things. There were ways, but not like we have. Yeah.
While we're talking about sacrifices, why was it so important to splash the blood on the altar?
Good question. Yeah. Why is it so important to splash the blood on the altar in the sacrifice? We're really squeamish about blood. Yeah. 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 I imagine. Yeah. I can't imagine what the smell of the altar was like after a while. Yeah. Although I've never, some of you who have actually been around slaughtering, for example, you probably have a better sense of what that's like. I've never slaughtered an animal or been there during butchering. You have, yeah, exactly. Some of you have more insight into this than I do, actually. I will say in Leviticus, the blood is sacred, right? So the blood is understood to be holy. You're not supposed to eat the blood. The blood is supposed to be poured out. Some of it's to be sprinkled on the altar. Blood is sacred when it comes from people as well, including reproductive blood, which is not the way that we think of reproduction today, but the blood of menstruation. There's a sacredness to that. There's something about its loss that's a little bit tragic and needs to be honored with this clean-unclean dynamic. We'll talk a little bit about that. For men, nocturnal emissions, which we would not call blood, but some of the ancient world would call I'll just say it, semen blood, like a special kind of blood that when these two kinds of blood mix, they make life. There's something close. You can see hints of what we understand childbirth to be now in that, but that these were sacred things that had to be honored. And part of how you honor that is you withdraw from your daily life for that day or for the week or whatever it is, or for 2 months after childbirth, for example. So blood is understood to be holy. The life is in the blood, and the blood has been given to you for the forgiveness of sins, I think is what it says, or something like that, for the covering up, for atonement. It's been given to you for atonement. So it has to do with this, the understanding of blood is sort of a gift from God to connect us to God, even across our sinfulness, the divide that separates us. So I'd say the altar splashing is probably a symbolism of that. Also, the blood is sometimes sprinkled on the people. That happens too in some sacrifice, in the Yom Kippur sacrifice, the Day of Atonement sacrifice. That happens. This is the blood of the covenant, which we hear words very similar to that. This cup is the what is it? This cup is the new covenant in my blood. That's what the words we get from communion. Jesus is pulling on the Old Testament here, the Hebrew Bible, when he says that. John, yeah, you've had your hand up. Sorry.
Page 457.
Actually, Vic, do you want to add something to that before? Is this related to what we're talking about?
It's related to surprise.
Vic, were you going to comment on what we were talking about
Well,
before we go?
I remember the old timers back when I was a kid. When they butchered,
Yeah.
the only thing they didn't keep was the squeal or the moo.
Yeah. You kept everything basically.
What did you say, Keith?
The old timers always said that you didn't keep anything, or you kept everything except the moo and the squeal.
Kept everything but the sound that they made. Yeah. So there is something valuable being sacrificed. I mean, blood is useful, right? We don't use blood in our cooking, but there are, there's blood pudding peoples have used the blood. Here they don't use it. That is a sacrifice. Wow. They don't use certain organs within the animal that understood to belong to God. They don't use certain parts of the fat that surround those organs. Those are understood to be God's portion, in a sense. Parts of the entrails, which God doesn't seem to mind, even if you or I might not want to eat it, but God seems to. For God, it's a pleasing aroma, right, as it's burned. Yeah. John, I want to go to you first, and then we'll go over.
Page 457. After everything that Manasseh did, and then all of a sudden the Lord takes him back.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, so Manasseh, 457. Manasseh is like one of the worst. So he comes right after Hezekiah. I think they mentioned there's sort of this pendulum. Hezekiah is one of the best, and then his son Manasseh is like undoes and more everything Hezekiah does. And yet that there is, Manasseh is said to have some repentance here. In general, in Chronicles telling, one of the things Chronicles doesn't say anything about the northern kings. It's completely Judah focused. It's completely southern kingdom focused. So, if you compare this to what's in 2 Kings, you'll notice there's just a lot of kings that no story is told about. Ahab. We hear one little story about King Ahab and Jezebel. Hear a lot about them in Kings. We don't hear almost anything. In fact, I don't think we hear about Jezebel at all in Chronicles. Ahab's mentioned, but only because of a thing he does with one of the southern kings. So it's very southern in focus. It also, I'm not sure if this is me reading into it. It almost seems like it tries to rehabilitate some of the kings. Like, even with Manasseh. Like, Manasseh was absolutely terrible. But he did feel sorry for a bit, and God did take him back here. There's a little bit of like trying to rehabilitate. I'm not sure about that. I'm still, I still don't feel like I know what to do with Chronicles, or how to, maybe I should put it this way, how to fruitfully use Chronicles today. This is certainly helping me, though. Danielle, did you have something you want to say?
Well, I was just thinking about how blood was thought of.
Oh, about blood.
And then wondering what the culture around blood was during Jesus' time, and what the significance of him, communion, and him giving his blood, and how that was received. Good. So the question was wondering about, thinking about the symbolism and the understanding of blood culturally as being as being sacred. What Jesus then says in his time, how that
connects. So yeah, certainly among the Jews anyways. I don't know about the wider culture, but certainly among the Jews in Judea and Galilee, Jerusalem centric, they certainly would share this sort of Leviticus thinking about blood. And sacrifices were still ongoing at that time. The temple was there. So when Jesus says things like that, it's offensive. But it's not offensive because blood is offensive. It's offensive because, so for one thing, he says, unless you drink my blood, which is specifically forbidden. Like in Leviticus, it's forbidden more than once. Anyone who eats meat with the blood in it shall be, cut off from the people. So Jesus, a Jew, institutes a central, one of our two sacraments that we still observe today as Lutherans, and in which we are told to do something that is explicitly against the law of Moses as found in Leviticus. That is the consumption of blood. You're not supposed to do this. Jesus says, this is my blood now, and it's given for you. And this is a blood of the new covenant. There's something where Jesus is redoing, recapitulating. You'd say he's doing again what happened before, but in a way that completely surprises us and turns the tables on it. I think I've talked before about the difference between sacrifice and sacrament of direction. Sacrifice is primarily towards God. Now, God has to come to us to give us the ways of sacrifice. It's not completely one-sided. But sacrifice is primarily the direction is us towards God. The direction of sacrament is God towards us. And so it becomes a sacrifice. Well, now we are the ones receiving the sacred substance that before we were giving to God. That there's something reversal about this in Jesus. Yeah.
Well, and from Genesis early on,
yes,
everyone was a vegetarian, couldn't eat meat at all until God gave us
until Noah
to eat.
Yeah, right.
And so is Jesus now giving us blood, and is that is it okay because people have blood sausage and stuff
sure
now?
Yes.
What we're interpreting, is it okay to have blood now?
Yeah, good. So there's kind of a separate question. So one is the connection to the way that there's a change in the Genesis narrative. Before Noah, nobody eats animals. After Noah, after the ark, it says, I will put the fear of you on the animals, so they won't just hang out with you anymore. It won't be a Disney movie anymore. They'll be running off. And they are yours to eat. The clean animals are yours to eat, right? That there's this, here this is now for you to eat that wasn't before. So I'd say there is something of that in the book of Acts in particular regarding the food laws, such as the prohibition of eating blood. There's a famous one in Acts, I think it's chapter 10, where Peter has this vision of this sheet. We're going to read it in a few weeks, but where Peter has this vision of a sheet coming down from heaven with every kind of animal on it, clean and unclean. And he hears this voice that says, get up, take and eat. And Peter says, no, Lord, I've never eaten anything unclean at all. And the voice then repeats, what I have declared clean, you shall not treat as though it's unclean. And there's this understanding that happens 3 times, and then he goes straight from there and goes into the house of a Gentile. While he's there, the Holy Spirit falls on this Gentile household, and they baptize him. And it's sort of this understanding that the things that made Israel distinct before are now opening. That now there's an intention that this is a going out to the Gentiles, including their unclean foods. Like that, all of this is an opening up and a change, whereas before this was not allowed. Now it's being allowed. And so as Christians, we certainly, this is why Christians don't observe kosher laws primarily today. That's why we eat pork, right, for example. That's why we wear clothes that are mixed threads. I don't know if this is mixed threads, but, we don't wear clothes that are made in a kosher way necessarily. Maybe to our detriment sometimes, actually, but there it is. So there is a change that's happening there, yeah. Karma, I saw your hand up. I want to...
Yeah, I might have missed this. I'm wondering about the relationship between Queen of Sheba and Solomon.
Yeah. What were you wondering about? So the relationship between the Queen of Sheba and Solomon.
I've read it a few times, but they must have had, the countries must have had relations in order for her to give him stuff.
Yeah, or it seems like it's the founding of relations there. I don't know that we know anything historically about her, or even exactly where Sheba is, or where I've read different things. We might know more than I know. I don't know the specifics of that. I think part of the reason that story is so celebrated and is told in such detail again in Chronicles, whereas a lot of stories aren't, is it's an example of Solomon's fame, that this far off country that nobody's ever really heard of, or they don't know anything about, they've heard of it, but it's just, it's the, I don't know what the equivalent would be, but it's just someplace really far away that we don't really know. Even they come, and she's so impressed, and then there's this exchange of gifts.
In a different part of the Bible, didn't somebody try and trick him with the wisdom?
She comes to test him.
Yeah.
I don't think she's trying to trick him exactly, but basically the way that Chronicles tells it, I think it's pretty much the same as how First Kings tells it, although you could look and I might be wrong there, is she's heard this great, of his great wisdom, and so she's come with all the hardest questions she can think of to like, let's see how good your wisdom is, and also these are things I actually want to know. So I wouldn't say it's tricking him, but it's trying to test him out. Is this real, or is this just all talk? Yeah.
And then she's willing to give him stuff.
Yeah, and then she's more than impressed. She's like, the rumors I heard didn't even do half of the justice to you. Yeah. That's sort of where she comes out of here.
And then my other comment was on 4:30.
Yeah, 4:30.
And you guys might have talked about this second time. The Spirit of God came on Azariah, son of Oded. But then, if you add a few sentences, for a long time Israel was without the true God, without a priest to teach and without the law. But in their distress, they turned to the Lord, the God of Israel, and sought him, and he was found by them. Just my own thinking, it's like even when we're lost, we have this innate calling to search for God.
Yeah, interesting. So noticing this pattern here, so it's on 4:30. For a long time, Israel was without the true God, without a priest to teach, without the law, but in their distress, they turned to the Lord, the God of Israel, and sought him, and he was found by them. And it's not clear, exactly what time is he referring to? I kind of thought of the period of the Judges, maybe, is the period that's being alluded to there. But there's actually a lot of different periods that it could relate to, a lot of reigns of kings. Their time in Egypt. There's a lot of times that maybe it could refer to. But hearing that as a pattern of like, even when we are so disconnected from God that we have lost the true God, there's still sort of this, have we really lost it? Maybe our backs are turned, but maybe. So I think our psalm today is Psalm 23, if I'm not mixing my Sundays up. And the Lord is my shepherd. So maybe even when we've lost the shepherd hasn't lost us. Maybe there's something there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good. All right, we're past our time, and I need to check in with our pianist for this morning. So let me close us in prayer and send us on our way. Good and gracious God, we thank you again for your faithfulness to us. Give us the strength to continue on in living faithfully in the world, in living faithfully before you, and in engaging faithfully with the words that you have given to us. Guide us, give us what you see that we need, and keep us close to you in faith. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.